All right, so let's talk about project management. All right, so what is a project? So basically, a project is a collection of all different tasks that have a common goal of delivering something, some product, right, within a particular time frame, within a particular budget, within a particular set of constraints that the user at the end hopefully will be satisfied. Or says, yes, this is exactly what I want. Great, thank you. And so the project manager is responsible for the day-to-day management of that. This actually happens at the end of a project. There's all sorts of activities that happen while managing a project. The scoping, what is it that we're actually going to be building. There's some negotiation of saying, well, when can we deliver this? Maybe we can deliver this in phase 2. Is it that important? Let's bring it into an early phase. Finding the folks that do the work. Planning, organizing, control. There's all sorts of activities in a project management endeavor, and basically what we want to be able to do is to deliver something that is acceptable to somebody, saying some subjective measure that they says, yep, that is exactly what I want, at the minimum amount of cost and within a particular time frame. So there's these four dimensions, 4 areas that a project manager has to take into account: the cost, the time, the quality, and the scope. And some things, go in contrast with one another. And one of the mantras in IT project management is that if your project is already late, it's not going to help if you add more folks to a project. You're actually going to make it even later, right? So if it's already late, that's it. You just have to manage somebody else's expectations of what you can deliver. Right. So what do we mean by a project being successful? Well, hopefully somebody's going to be happy when we give this, right, that's acceptable to somebody, to some stakeholders, within whatever constraints they might have given us, some business constraints, some requirements, or some deadline, or some level of scope of within a budget that they prescribed. And also, some minimum disruption of all of the process that is already ongoing. I'm sure the project manager will have to interview all sorts of folks in the organization, interrupt them in their normal process of doing their work, and they'll be and ask them folks to participate in very costly meetings, right? So because they're not producing while they're meeting with you. So the project manager needs to juggle all these things to take the project into a success or resolution. Why sometimes projects fail? We've talked about this, right? That the executive management is not engaged. They're not there to answer questions in a timely fashion. They're very vague. They give us some contradictory statements. They won't commit to a particular methodology, or if we do commit to a particular methodology, we don't follow the steps that are prescribing that methodology. And they're continuously changing their mind and adding new work to be done, or their requirements are changing, or features are being crept into the project. Some causes of these failures is that oftentimes we commit too early to a particular budget or to a particular timeline. Right? We don't look at all the different risks that might be involved. That a team might not be familiar with a technology. That all the requirements are going to be changing. That we're going to be using a brand new methodology that we're not familiar with. And also some of the managers might not be have very good people skills. So their management skills definitely takes into account. Some of the activities, at first, typically there'll be some scope negotiation, coming to agreement on what it is that we're building, identifying all the tasks that everybody's that we're going to need, and fill in that backlog. Come up with some estimation of what the best case scenario of being able to deliver something. What's the worst case scenario? What's our best guesstimate on the delivery schedule? Identify that certain things need to occur in a particular order. Right, that we can't build this before we do that. Right, there will be some dependency on these tasks. Identify all the folks that know Java or Node or Vue or React or whatever. All the staffing that know these expertise. And then obviously, execute the day-to-day execution and measuring the progress of the team going forward. So some of the tools that are used for that project managers might use is create a work breakdown structure that we have a very high level project that we need to build and see what are all the pieces that we can break it up into minutia things that can be done in a day, going from things that need to be done in 2 years and breaking it up into, well, what do we have to do day to day? So the work breakdown structure allows you to do that, identify all these different things that need to get done, and all sorts of graphical representations of all these tasks that we can move around and see what the dependencies are in a timeline, such as a PERT and the Gantt chart. Project scoping. So to identify all the different things that need to be done, usually we can use a technique called the work breakdown structure that breaks down, decomposes a huge product into smaller subsets that can be bite-sized and broken down that you can complete in a day or so. That together will build an entire project. You might start with a very high level description of what the project might be, and then break it down into further analysis of what could be broken. So a project needs all sorts of things, development deliverables, system requirements, business requirements, all sorts of requirements. So this is perhaps from the requirements point of view. And the business requirements, you might have all sorts of user interfaces, use cases, and business processes, and then so on and so forth, data modeling, class diagrams, sequence diagrams, and whatnot that to describe. So all the things that need to happen, right? And these are all abstractions, all the way down to physical things that actually, concrete things that need to be that can be completed in a week or in a few days and actually assigned to somebody to do. But it all starts with something high level and then breaks down into something smaller and smaller. Also, you have scope negotiation on when since the resources are limited, right? We don't have infinite time, we don't have infinite money, so there's always going to be some compromises that say, well, do you want something really fast but low quality and risky, or do you have? So what do you have? You have time, money. What do you have? And depending on juggling these compromises, you have to make do of what is it that with what you have, with the budget you have, with the time that you have, the level of quality that you want to achieve, and the available resources. At some point, the project manager takes all those work breakdown structure and creates a formal a statement of work of formally this is what we're going to be doing in a narrative form, describing what the deliverables are going to be, what the different milestones are going to be by phase, by quarter, depending on what the business can on their particular structure. Project estimation. We want to be able to give some sense of when can we deliver this by, and typically it depends on whether how do you want to count this, right? Do you want to count it by the number of features or the product is going to have? What are the things that you want to build, or how long do you want to have this? But usually you cannot fix both. You can either tell me I want these features, right? But you need to let me choose how long I need to be able to deliver those features, or you can tell me we need to deliver something by the end of the year, and then we can decide what features we can deliver by the end of the year. But usually we can't fix both. You can't fix and say, well, I want these features by the end of the year, right? Oftentimes we need to leave, choose one, but leave the other one, movable. So typically we like to be able to identify what the task is going to be, given some measure of estimate, perhaps a best case scenario, worst case scenario, and maybe a best guesstimate. And for each task, identify with the level of effort for cost estimation, and then the duration for scheduling. So for duration, for the task duration, depending on the time frame that you're asking us, if it's something that needs to be estimated for today, that could be fairly accurate. If it's something that goes out a week or two, I can give you a best guesstimate of how long it might be. But if you start asking me what's going to be next month or next year, my guesses are going to be way off. So it could be how rough you want these estimates, some order of magnitude of saying, well, this feels like it's twice as hard as something else, right? That you can compare some things that based on your experience and doing some analogy of what you're being asked to do and making some guesstimate on the order of magnitude that compares two different tasks, or some rough estimate that you say, well, it's within 50, 100% of the actual thing. So I could be off by half, right, or by a quarter, or how accurate you think I can be. So obviously, the closer the time frame, I can be much more fair in my estimations, and the farther out my cone of uncertainty just gets wider and wider of trying to come up with something that it's fair, right? Always provide some range and not be specific. Some estimation practices typically like to be able to go down to the granularity of what it would take a person on days, not hour by hour, and say, well, what can you tell me that can be done in 1 or 2 or 3 days, right? Can you break it down to your tasks that are small enough that one person could perhaps complete it in a day or two. Also, it helps to ask the actual person who's going to be working on this, right? And it typically might help to ask multiple people, right? Because some folks, different levels of experience, some folks being more optimistic than others. It helps to have some information from several folks, and then you can do perhaps a weighted average of the different estimates of what folks are telling you. And also base it on the size and the effort of the complexity. Some other techniques is that you go out and perhaps you have folks who have worked on this before, right? That they're experts, that you consider their judgment to be expert. And even then, being expert, you might have a range of feedbacks of what folks are going to tell you, what things are going to take. Or analogy, some experience of having done something similar. And you can bring to bear some of that experience and be able to tell, well, we've done something similar to this and it took us so many months. This should be more or less the same kind of complexity, or be able to do some algorithm modeling where you have I need these many data models. I need these many CRUDs. I need these many web services. I need these many user interfaces, and so on and so forth. And you can start adding together. Well, it'll take me at least a day to do the data modeling, at least another day to do the web services, maybe another day to do all the CRUD, maybe another day to do all the database stuff, and maybe another day. So there you go. I needed a week for each particular data model. And if you have 30 data models, then you can come out and say, well, I'll need this amount of time on average, right? So you can start calculating and adding up all these artifacts that need to be built, right? A couple other factors that you should consider when you're doing estimation is that folks don't necessarily work, are not 100% efficient, right? Usually, there's all sorts of holidays in between. Folks get sick. Folks get demotivated. Folks can have all sorts of things happening outside of work. So project managers usually consider that they might have somebody really working on something, perhaps 70% of the time. Where there's going to be a lot of inefficiency of folks, in meetings and all sorts of other things happening. So they don't expect you to be 100% there. And there's some competency. Obviously, you have folks in different levels of experience. Where you have very competent folks, some junior folks, and it's just a variation of talent. That's to be expected. As a project manager, always consider those kinds of things, and also just consider that things are just hard, right? That you might not. The project manager usually doesn't have a feeling of how something is hard. That something that they might feel is hard is actually very trivial, or something that they think is very hard is actually that's easy. It's actually very hard. Right. So certainly the project manager needs to be cognizant and use and delegate some of this information to folks who've actually worked on this before. Some efforts on estimating this is to have a range of estimations of what would be the best case. What's the most optimistic? Can we deliver this in a week? And the most pessimistic might be that, no, we can't deliver this before the end of the month. And what would be the expected? What's the best guess? We can use weighted average to build and maybe average out that the most optimistic and the pessimistic and our best guess. Add them up and weight average to get what we expect it to be, right? On what it might be the actual value. Or you might have use a technique called a Delphi or wideband Delphi, where you bring whole folks that are experts at this particular at building these kinds of systems, and then you ask everybody anonymously and say, well, fill out what you think it might take, right? And anonymously, so that folks don't, they're not biased from one another. It's for instance, it makes no sense to ask somebody. And in front of everybody, folks start saying that it's easy, and it starts biasing everybody else to also say that it's easy because they hear somebody else saying that it's easy. So typically, it should be anonymous, and then all the votes come in, and the project manager looks at all the different estimates, and then invites everybody. And usually there'll be some distribution where most folks will agree. But there was some edge cases where some folks might say it's too easy, or some folks might say that's too hard. And in those meetings, folks are giving a chance to defend their position, right? The ones that are saying that it's very easy or it's so hard, to defend their position, and then come to an agreement of what actually is, right? In Agile, we typically are looking for much more Agile ways of doing the same thing. We might do perhaps at the planning meeting, or we usually sometimes refer to as a planning party. We give a deck of cards to everybody that have values from 0 to 9, or maybe a modified Fibonacci numbers, maybe 1, 3, 5, 9. Some where the values of the pointage of each story grows exponentially. And folks are given these decks, and then everybody votes, throwing a card in the middle of the table, and we try to come to an agreement on how much a particular effort of a particular story might be. And typically everybody votes at the same time, simultaneously, so there's no bias, right? And then low, high folks that defend their edge cases, and then you repeat until there's some consensus in the team. Project planning, once we've decided these are the things that we're going to be doing, we need to decide, well, what starts first? What do we work on first? There's certainly we need to take into consideration dependencies, right? That you can't start working on this until this is done, right? So only when this is done, then we can start on that, right? So there's a couple of different types of dependencies, meaning we need to finish something before we start something else, or that two different things need to start at the same time, or two things need to finish at the same time, right? Or that something needs to start so I can finish something else. So there's all sorts of types of dependencies that can be considered. There's also a couple other strategies on what to decide what to do first, depending on whether you were asked for a fixed set of things that you need to do, a fixed scope, meaning you have to, a minimum viable product needs to have these features. It's non-negotiable. For in that case, it's better to do a forward scheduling, meaning, all right, this is all the things that we need to do. I'm just going to do, well, we do this, that, and the other, and then it comes out to some date in the future, right? And so my calculus will be done by sometime next year, mid next year. So that's called forward scheduling, right? Where you don't have a fixed delivery date, right? You just calculate forward what you think you're going to need, right? You might be off, obviously, and this works well for a fixed scope. This is what the minimum amount of work that needs to be done. Or reverse scheduling works if you're giving a delivery date and says, no, you don't have till the mid next year. You have to this year. We have to be done by the holidays, right? The product needs to go on sale this holiday. Now you have a hard line. Then we have to be able to negotiate on the things that we could deliver by that date, right? So we do a reverse scheduling where we say, okay, we have this time. We'll need a month for QA, right? We'll need another month for acceptance testing. We'll need another month for unit testing and all. And then you go back to today, right? What can you start doing today, right? Having removed a month for testing, having removed another month for acceptance testing, right? And all the way back to what you need to start today. So typically, you want to try to do both, just to do some balance checking, right? That both should come to an agreement. If you do both reverse and forward scheduling, and then you start assigning to folks, right? Assigning resources. You need folks there. You need facilities, equipment, supplies, the money, and the finance resources to do this, right? Typically, you have some kind of matrix of saying who's responsible for what, who's responsible for whatever resources you might have, and also you might also list all the folks that might be able to answer different questions about different aspects of the project. Who's the expert at certain things? Cindy knows about these things, and Ann knows about these other things. So you can go in and ask the subject matter experts about these things. Then Gantt charts are very useful to be able to lay out all the different tasks and all the dependencies of what needs to happen in what order. These became very popular during the First World War, but ever since they've become more and more popular on being able to graphically see all the moving tasks that are occurring and who's working on what. PERT is also very useful to identify, for instance, what is the most critical path. What's the absolute set of features or tasks that need to occur, to make sure that your product will be on time. It allows you to create all these different nodes that show dependencies amongst each other, where what are the estimates of how long something's going to take before something else needs to start. And the longest path in this graph is what is referred to as a critical path, right? That if any one node is late, it's just going to push the product over the scheduled line. There might be other tasks that might occur in tandem, right? That are not critical, right? That if those are late, it doesn't affect the overall delivery of the product. But you certainly want to make sure that you identify what the critical path is, and you make sure that stays in time. Activity nodes, you might have a description of those tasks and when they're scheduled to start, how long do you expect them to the duration, and when was it scheduled to start, and the actual start date, right? So that you can start moving around some pieces and see any repercussions downstream. Obviously, back then, way back when, it was all drawn, and folks were drawing these things on the board and using magnets and so they can move things around. But today, electronically, there's tons of tools, graphical tools that allow you to, commercial tools that allow you to do this graphically. So the project manager is responsible for making sure that to monitor, especially the critical path, that things are not being pushed off, and what negotiations might be done to put the project back on schedule. And there's all sorts of effective project management techniques. All right. Excellent. Let's have the quiz.